Welcome to the sleep hours, the only place where cartoons fall asleep before you do. So grab your blanket, tuck in your favorite plushie, and let's get weird. So the story begins with the lost episode of Courage, the Cowardly Dog, which is Return to Nowhere. The desert plains of nowhere stretched endlessly beneath a sun that never felt quite right. Its light spilled over the dry land in an odd, sickly hue, somewhere between sepia and bone. The wind swept across the fields, whistling not with life, but with something hollow, something that seemed to whisper, "Nothing ever leaves." The camera lingered too long on the farmhouse. Not in a cinematic way, more like a broadcast had glitched and didn't know when to cut. The image flickered once, almost too fast to notice. Then again. The sky above didn't shift, didn't move. No birds passed, no insects stirred. It was morning, supposedly. Inside the farmhouse, Courage lay in his bed. His eyes were wide open, not from waking up, but from realizing he hadn't slept at all. There was a stillness in his stare, one that suggested this was not the first time this moment had happened. He rose slowly, as if weighed down by more than just fatigue. The room was quiet, unnaturally so. The silence carried weight. It pressed into the walls, the floorboards, and the very air. From downstairs, the familiar sounds of domestic life echoed up faintly, but something was off. Not wrong, exactly, just repeating. A spoon stirred, a cupboard closed, a door slammed, all in perfect rhythm, as though someone had pressed play on a recording. Downstairs, the kitchen was too bright, washed out. The colors seemed leached from reality. Time didn't feel like it was passing, just looping. The calendar on the wall still read July 15th. The page hadn't flipped in days, maybe weeks. The air was stale. The kind that collects in a room that hasn't seen real weather in far too long. Outside, the wind whispered again, but the trees did not move. Not a single leaf, not a single creak. It was all sound without source, noise without nature, a backdrop meant to simulate the real thing. Courage stepped into the fields where the cornstalk stood too still. No rustle, no sway, just rows of rigid stalks staring into the distance. That's when he saw it. A figure deep in the rows. It looked like him. Identical shape, same posture, eyes wide, too wide. For a moment they stared at each other. Then it vanished, not ran, blinked, gone as if edited out of existence mid-frame. He backed away. The corn seemed to hum, low and mechanical, like the rumble of a broken broadcast tower. He turned back toward the house, but something felt different. It wasn't the house that had changed. It was reality itself. Subtle things, the angles, the shadows, the feeling. Later that night, the farmhouse sat in its usual silence, but it was too clean, too arranged. The objects seemed placed, not lived in. The furniture looked as though it hadn't moved in months. The air was heavy with a strange expectancy, as if the house itself were waiting for something. In the living room, the clock ticked, but did not advance. He walked through the house, retracing steps he had taken countless times before. Every hallway led to the same thoughts. Every creaking board whispered the same doubts. Time wasn't moving, it was looping, playing a reel, again and again. When he entered the basement, the air grew colder, not from lack of warmth, but from something else, something deeper. Like the walls remembered something you weren't supposed to know. Down there, in the dust and darkness, sat a rusted filing cabinet. Its drawer opened with a sharp squeal. Inside, Polaroids, dozens, maybe hundreds. Each photo bore the same date, July 15th. Same clothes, same faces, same tired eyes. But they were not duplicates. They were moments, split seconds. The same day over and over, captured and stored, as if time had refused to move forward and had instead started folding in on itself. That's when the whisper came. Not from a voice, but from the space around him, a message not heard but received. You never left. The flashlight flickered. He turned. There, in the far edge of the light, stood a figure. No eyes, no mouth, no name, just presence. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It simply watched. Then the light died, and the screen faded to black. And yet, the hum... The screen returned with static. Not the crisp television snow of modern screens, but an older, almost organic static, like dust swirling in front of a broken film projector. Then, abruptly, it cleared. The camera panned through the living room of the farmhouse once again. Everything was exactly where it had been. Not similar. Identical. The blanket draped over the armrest hadn't moved. The teacup on the side table was still half full, casting the same distorted reflection in the wood grain. The clock, still stuck at 7:06 p.m., ticked onward. But the hands never shifted. The same spoon stirred in the same bowl. The wind blew again. But the curtains, those thin, faded yellow curtains, remained perfectly still. Courage sat in the middle of it all, not moving. There was no panic this time, no scrambling, just stillness. He wasn't confused anymore. He was watching, waiting, measuring. Because this time, he knew what was about to happen. And it did. The same sound outside, the distant creak of the porch swing, the same heavy footsteps up the stairs, the door clicking open, each second falling into place like a groove on a broken record. But this time, he got up. He walked slowly to the back hallway. The air thickened as he passed through it. Every step sounded like it echoed longer than it should have. The walls on either side pressed inward. Not physically, but perceptually, like the hallway was narrowing only when you weren't looking directly at it. He reached the coat closet. It was always locked. Tonight it wasn't. Inside there was no coat, no shoes. Just a staircase. One that had never been there before. It spiraled downward into pitch-black nothingness, impossibly long for a 2-story house in the middle of nowhere. No hesitation this time. He descended. Step after step. The air grew colder. Not like winter cold, but cold like absence. A dead space that hadn't known light or life in a long, long time. The staircase ended in a small square room. The walls were metal, smooth, featureless. But the center held a screen with old CRT, humming gently, its edges flickering with faint ghostly lines of distortion. It turned on as he approached. What it showed was the living room, the one upstairs, in real time. And there they were, Muriel and Eustace, sitting, moving, talking, looping, exactly as they had been every night, every day. But on the screen something else was there, too. Another Courage. Not him. Not exactly. This one stood in the corner of the screen, motionless. His face blurred, his outline twitching, as if he didn't belong in that space. Courage backed away, but the screen followed. It shifted as if locked onto his presence, dragging the footage along with him. Then a sound behind him. A slow, deep inhale. Not mechanical, not animal. Human. He turned around. Nothing. But the temperature had dropped. Breath now clouded in front of him. And on the screen, something else had changed. The looping Muriel and Eustace were now frozen, their bodies suspended mid-gesture. And the twitching Courage? He was now staring directly at the camera. No mouth, no pupils, just a face that seemed to absorb the screen rather than reflect it. Then the camera in the footage panned slightly, almost imperceptibly, and it became clear. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at him, through it, as if the screen wasn't a monitor at all, but a window. The lights flickered in the room. That humming returned, low, pulsing, almost like a voice trying to mimic a machine. Courage stepped back, and then the door slammed shut behind him. The screen went black. The hum stopped. Silence swallowed the room like a beast swallowing its prey. He was alone. At least, that's what he told himself, until the screen came back on again. This time, it no longer showed the living room. It showed the staircase he had come from. Live. Empty. Except it wasn't. A shadow now moved along the steps. One that didn't make sound. One that didn't belong to him. It was coming down. Absolutely. Here's the third portion of segment 1 of Return to Nowhere. About 4,000 characters, continuing right where we left off. It keeps the tension rising and deepens the eerie atmosphere without a hard stop so you can smoothly flow into the next segment whenever you want. The shadow glided silently down the metal stairs, each step a whisper in the suffocating stillness. It was shapeless, more a distortion of the air than a solid figure, but its presence pressed on the room like a weight, cold and inexorable. Courage stood frozen, heart pounding in his chest as if trying to shatter his ribs from the inside. The flickering light overhead cast fragmented shards of illumination, dancing across the bare walls in an unpredictable rhythm. Every flicker made the shadow twist and stretch, mocking the laws of reality. His breath caught. The humming that had just ceased now returned, but warped, deeper, slower, like a funeral dirge sung by a machine that had forgotten how to weep. The screen remained blank, yet somehow the blackness on it felt alive. It pulsed faintly, as if breathing alongside Courage. His eyes, wide and unblinking, darted around the room for an escape. Any escape! But the door was still shut tight, the walls pressing in, the air thickening. And then the hum shifted, from a low mechanical drone into something far more familiar, a faint melody like a lullaby, slow and broken, weaving between the static like a ghost's whispered secret. The sound wrapped around Courage, curling tight like chains. It pulled memories from the depths of his mind. Images flickered behind his eyes, the farmhouse, Muriel's gentle smile, Eustace's gruff shouts, the endless empty field, but each memory was distorted, stretched thin, fraying at the edges. He shook his head, trying to cast it off, but the lullaby grew louder. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a call, a summons. The shadow advanced closer now. Its form coalesced, taking on an unsettling semblance of life. Not quite Courage. Not quite anything familiar. It was a mirror cracked in places, reflecting parts of him but warped, twisted, soulless. Then the figure spoke. Not with words, but a pulse, a vibration deep inside Courage's chest, like a code being transmitted directly into his being. You don't belong here. Courage's instinct screamed. His muscles tensed as he scrambled to the door, pounding at it with frantic paws. But the door remained unmoving, solid as the walls that enclosed him. He looked back. The shadow was closer now, inches from him. And in the flickering light, Courage saw it. Something behind the shadow. Something even darker. A crack appeared along the far wall. Fine at first, then spiderwebbing outward with a sinister pulse. From the crack, a dull red light bled through, like a wound beneath the skin of the house. The shadow stepped through the crack, and the space seemed to bend, like gravity itself was twisting. Courage stumbled backward, his fur standing on end. The air around him shimmered as if the room itself was breathing, expanding, contracting, alive in ways it shouldn't be. Then everything changed. Suddenly, the walls around him dissolved, replaced by the familiar but wrong vista of the farmhouse's porch. But this wasn't the porch he knew. The grass was dead, the sky bruised purple and black.
The farmhouse windows stared like empty eyes, and the door hung off its hinges, creaking in a wind that wasn't there. Courage was outside, but somehow trapped, like a ghost tethered to a place it no longer recognized. His breathing came out in ragged gasps. He looked down at his paws, flesh faded, edges blurry, as if he too was unraveling. And then he heard it. From the empty porch a voice called out. Not a voice he recognized, not a voice he wanted to hear. It whispered his name, slowly, patiently, with a promise of forgetting. Courage. He ran toward the sound, but the porch stretched farther away with every step. The sky darkened as the wind picked up, carrying with it distant echoes of laughter, twisted, hollow, mocking. He paused at the edge of the porch, looking back. Behind him, the crack in reality still pulsed. A figure stood in the fracture, just as tall, just as hollow as the shadow before. The world trembled. The humming returned, louder now, vibrating through his bones. And then, without warning, the sky split open. A jagged tear of light ripped across the bruised clouds, revealing a glimpse into a void beyond. A vast, empty darkness that seemed to swallow everything. Courage looked up, heart pounding. Because in that darkness he saw not stars, not galaxies, but eyes. Thousands of eyes blinking slowly, watching, waiting. And the last thing Courage felt before the world collapsed around him was the sensation of falling. Not down, not forward, but inward. The fall felt endless. Not like a physical drop, but as if he were being pulled into the very fabric of a shifting nightmare, one that unraveled time and space itself. There was no ground beneath him, no air to hold on to, only a vast, impossible darkness pressing in from all sides. The thousands of blinking eyes surrounded him, watching with a cold, indifferent patience. They did not blink in unison, but shifted asynchronously like the fractured pieces of a broken mirror trying to see themselves whole again. Each eye held memories not his own, glimpses of places and times long forgotten. A whisper curled around his mind, soft, distant, yet unmistakable. The voice was neither cruel nor kind. It was simply a voice of inevitability. You belong here. You always have. And then, light, harsh, blinding, like a shutter, snapping open. Suddenly, Courage was falling backward, crashing through layers of reality as if they were fragile glass. He tumbled through shards of distorted memories, images of Muriel's smile, Eustace's gruff scowl, the cornfields waving in the wind, each fragment flickering like a broken projector reel. He landed hard on the cold floor of the farmhouse basement, gasping. The air was thick and stale, smelling of dust and forgotten things. The faint hum from the old CRT monitor in the corner buzzed weakly as if waking from a long slumber. Courage blinked and looked up. The basement was the same, but different. The filing cabinet stood open, empty now. The photographs were gone. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing beneath their cracked paint. He scrambled to his feet and ran up the stairs, the familiar creaks sounding like echoes from another life. Upstairs, the farmhouse was empty. No sign of Muriel or Eustace. No sound but the ticking of the clock stuck at 7:06. The curtains fluttered gently, though no breeze could be felt. Courage moved through the room, searching. The silence was oppressive, thick with a weight that crushed hope. In the kitchen, the radio crackled to life on its own, emitting static that twisted into a faint melody, the same broken lullaby from before. And then a whisper. Not from the radio, from behind him. A breath cold against his neck. He spun around, but there was nothing. Only the empty room. The clock's second hand jumped forward, once, then stopped again. Time had shifted, but only just enough to remind him the loop was broken. For now, outside the sky darkened, heavy clouds rolling in as if the world itself was holding its breath.
Courage stood at the window, eyes scanning the horizon. And far in the distance, where the cornfield met the sky, something stirred. Something waiting. Something that knew he was watching. The wind whispered again. Only this time it said one word, return. The sky above nowhere was a bruised canvas, streaked with purples and grays, as if the day had been bruised by unseen hands. The sun, though present, was a pale and distant orb, struggling to burn through a thick shroud of lingering clouds. The wind that had whispered before now carried a bitter chill, weaving through the dead grass and skeletal cornstalks like a forgotten lament. Courage stood at the edge of the farm, paws dug into the dry earth, eyes fixed on the horizon. The farmhouse lay behind him, empty and hollow. The door hung askew, creaking softly with every gust, a whisper of decay that matched the heavy silence that had taken hold of nowhere. He had tried to leave before, tried to break free from the endless loop of July 15th, the never-ending cycle of repetition that clawed at his mind. But nowhere was a place that refused to let go. A trap woven from forgotten memories and fractured time. The cornfields swayed, but not with the usual rhythm of the wind. Instead, they moved like a sea caught in a slow, unnatural tide, bending and twisting with a purpose that felt almost conscious. It was as if the fields themselves were alive, watching, waiting. A soft rustle came from the shadows at the edge of the corn. Courage's ears twitched, his body tense. He stepped forward cautiously, tall and gaunt, with eyes too bright for the dusk around him. His clothes hung loose, torn and faded, as if he had wandered through time itself. But what caught Courage's attention wasn't his appearance. It was the way the man moved, not quite human, more like a memory struggling to hold form. The man stopped just beyond the field's edge, staring at Courage with a gaze that pierced through the dust and silence. A whisper slipped from the shadows around him, words carried on the wind like fragments of forgotten prayers. Return. Courage growled low in his throat, muscles coiling. He took a step back, but the man did not advance. Instead, he raised a hand, palm open, as if offering a fragile truce. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of old earth and rust. The sky darkened further, thick clouds blotting out what little light remained. From the horizon, other figures began to emerge, shapes blurred and indistinct, like smoke caught in a fragile flame. They moved slowly, their forms flickering between clarity and shadow. The man's voice was a rasp, barely more than a breath. You cannot run from this place. You are part of it. You belong here. Courage's eyes narrowed. He wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but the words settled in his chest like stones. The figures drew closer. Each step they took stirred the ground, sending up swirls of dust and ash. Courage's mind raced, memories flickering in fragmented bursts. Muriel's soft hum, Eustace's gruff muttering, the crackling radio in the dark basement, all looping, all incomplete. The tall man's eyes glowed brighter, reflecting a light that wasn't there. You have tried to forget, but forgetting is impossible here. Time folds back on itself, and the past bleeds into the present. Courage took another step back. His heart pounded, but his legs felt like they were sinking into the ground. The shadows at the edge of the cornfield stretched and writhed, coalescing into faces that bore the marks of pain, fear, and endless waiting. A voice whispered from the crowd, soft and broken. We are the forgotten, the lost, trapped between moments, between worlds. Courage's eyes darted between the faces, searching for something familiar, a hint of hope. But all he found was despair. The tall man stepped forward, the ground cracking beneath his feet. You cannot escape the cycle, but perhaps there is a way to break it. The crowd hushed, the shadows still. Courage's breath caught. For the first time since this nightmare began, a flicker of something stirred deep within him. Hope. But hope in nowhere was a dangerous thing, because for every light there was a shadow, and the shadows were watching. The crowd of shadowed figures shifted as one, their forms flickering between clarity and darkness like a fading signal. Their faces, etched with silent torment, seemed to tell stories that Courage couldn't quite grasp. Stories of loss, of longing, of endless waiting. The tall man's gaze never wavered from Courage's. His eyes, glowing faintly like dying embers, held a cruel kind of understanding. "You are tied to this place," the man said softly, voice like wind brushing over dry leaves. "The loop has bound you. It is your prison and your curse." Courage's paws trembled beneath him. The weight of the word settled deep into his bones. He felt it, the invisible chains of nowhere tightening with every breath he took. But why? The question formed inside him, wordless but urgent. Why him? Why this endless repetition? Why this suffocating limbo? The man stepped closer, the cracked earth groaning underfoot. "Because this is your story, your pain, your fear." The shadows whispered again, voices rising into a mournful chorus. "Return, remember, repeat." Courage's mind splintered, memories spilling forth like fractured glass. The farmhouse, the endless July 15th, the faces of Muriel and Eustace repeating their tired routines, and always the looming void, the silent watcher lurking just beyond perception. The man reached out a hand, trembling but certain. There is a way to escape, to break the cycle, but it is not without cost. Courage hesitated. Hope and fear wrestled inside him. What must I do? The silent plea echoed within him. The man's smile was thin, almost sad. "You must remember what you have forgotten. You must face what you fear. You must return to the beginning." He was falling into memory. The farmhouse kitchen, bright and warm. Muriel humming softly as she stirred her porridge. Eustace grumbling about the day's chores. But something was wrong. The light flickered, shadows stretching impossibly long. Muriel's smile faltered. Eustace's eyes darted nervously. And then a whisper, soft and urgent. "Remember." Courage's heart pounded. He wanted to turn away to escape the flood of memories threatening to drown him, but he knew he couldn't. He stepped forward into the heart of the loop. Back in the field, the shadowed figures faded, their voices dimming to silence. The tall man watched, eyes still glowing faintly. "You have begun," he said. "The path is dark, but it is the only way." Courage stood alone under the bruised sky, the wind whispering around him. The journey back to the beginning had begun, but nowhere was watching, waiting, and it would not let him go easily. The sky's bruised hues deepened, folding the horizon into a tight, suffocating frame. Courage stood alone in the open field, the tall grass bowing low, whispering secrets he could not yet understand. The weight of the tall man's words echoed relentlessly inside him, rattling the fragile walls of his mind. "You must remember." The phrase looped over and over, a drumbeat beneath the hum of the wind. Courage's paws shifted uneasily in the dirt, and a shiver passed through him, not from the cold, but from the creeping sense of inevitability. He turned toward the farmhouse once more, its silhouette a jagged scar against the deepening sky. The windows glowed faintly, dim beacons in a place where light was both a promise and a threat. Every step he took toward it seemed heavier than the last, as if the earth itself resisted his movement. Somewhere deep inside, the memory of the endless cycle tugged at him, a ghost hand dragging him backward even as he pressed forward. As he crossed the threshold, the familiar scent of old wood and stale dust clung to the air. The house felt different now, less a home and more a vessel for something ancient and restless. The floorboards groaned underfoot, as if warning him away. Courage's eyes flicked to the staircase leading downward, the place where the loop had first begun to unravel. The basement, the origin of the echoes. He descended slowly, each step a deliberate act of defiance. At the bottom, the flickering glow of the CRT screen cast fractured shadows on the walls. The air was thick, almost liquid with the tension of unspoken truths. The screen hummed softly before bursting into static, a cascade of fractured images and distorted voices. The photographs, once neatly stacked in the filing cabinet, now lay scattered like broken promises. Courage's gaze settled on a single photo, half buried beneath the debris. It was a picture of Muriel and Eustace, smiling in a moment frozen and impossible. The edges curled, colors faded, but the image pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat beneath the surface of reality. A cold breath swept past, and the temperature dropped sharply. The shadows along the walls began to writhe and twist, coalescing into shapes both familiar and alien. From the darkness emerged a figure, neither fully shadow nor fully flesh, a flickering semblance of someone Courage recognized but couldn't quite place. It reached out a trembling hand, and in that gesture, Courage saw everything. All the days folded into one, all the moments repeated endlessly, the fractured timeline of nowhere itself. The figure's face cracked into a hollow smile. "You are the beginning and the end," it whispered. The air trembled. Suddenly, the ground beneath Courage cracked open, revealing a chasm filled with swirling void and distant stars, an abyss that seemed to pull at the edges of his very being. He teetered on the edge, caught between worlds. Then, from the darkness, a faint light flickered, growing, expanding, swallowing the void. It was a candle's flame, fragile, defiant. Courage reached out toward it, his paws trembling. The flame's glow cast warm light on a single word, etched in the cracked earth beneath. "Remember." The word burned into his mind like a brand, and with that, the basement dissolved into darkness once more. The loop was not broken. It was only beginning. The warmth of the candle flickered briefly, then was swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Courage found himself standing in a void, neither here nor there. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. The endless loop stretched thin and taut like a wire ready to snap. In the distance, a faint glow pulsed. Heartbeat steady, yet faint, like a memory fighting to break through the fog. Courage's instinct screamed at him to follow, but every step toward the light felt like wading through thick molasses. The shadows pressed closer, whispering secrets he couldn't yet understand. Faces appeared in the gloom, flickering like fractured reflections. Muriel's gentle smile, Eustace's gruff scowl, the cornfield's endless rustle, all fragmented, all distorted. He was trapped between memories and nightmares, caught in the loop's web. The tall man's voice echoed in the void, soft, distant, but undeniable. "You are part of this. The cycle binds you. But to break free, you must remember everything, even what you fear most." Courage's mind raced. Images surged, times he had tried to run, to fight, to wake, every failed attempt folding back into the cycle. But beneath it all, a new thread wove through the chaos. A fragile hope, a path forward. He reached out, paw trembling toward the pulse of light. And as his paw brushed its glow, the world shattered. He was falling again, this time not into darkness, but into something else. Something waiting, something watching. The loop was shifting, and so was he. The world was no longer the same. The loop had cracked, but the fracture was jagged and raw, spilling fragments of memories and shadows into places they never belonged. Courage awoke in the farmhouse bedroom, but the room was distorted. Edges blurred, colors bleeding into one another like wet paint on a canvas left out in the rain. The clock on the wall ticked backwards. The window showed not the bright morning sun, but a swirling storm of black clouds that roiled like angry spirits. He rose slowly, his paws brushing against something cold on the floor, a shattered piece of mirror reflecting not his face, but a dozen twisted versions of himself staring back. Outside, the familiar landscape of nowhere was warped beyond recognition. The cornfields twisted into spirals, the trees gnarled like ancient claws reaching into the sky. The farmhouse door creaked open on its own. Courage hesitated, heart pounding like a drumbeat in the silent house. He stepped outside. The air was thick with the scent of earth and something else. Something metallic and sharp. In the distance, a figure waited. Not the tall man from before. This was smaller, quicker. Shadows clung to it like a cloak. It moved with unnatural grace, sliding between the twisted stalks of corn. The figure vanished beyond the horizon, but the wind carried a whisper, a single word, cracked and broken. Remember? Courage pushed through the cornfield, each step feeling heavier, as if the ground itself resisted his passage. The sky darkened further, the storm swirling overhead, threatening to break loose. Then the ground shook. A fissure ripped through the earth ahead, splitting the field like a wound. From the chasm, a light pulsed, cold, blue, and unnatural. Courage approached cautiously, the hairs on his neck rising. The light projected images into the sky, fragments of moments he had lived and forgotten. Muriel's smile, warm and bright. Eustace's angry glare. The day repeating itself, over and over. But beneath the images, something darker pulsed, a shadow moving just beyond the frame. Courage shivered. He reached the edge of the chasm. Peering down, he saw not earth, but a void, endless and infinite. The whisper came again, closer now. Remember the beginning. Courage closed his eyes, memories flooding back like a tidal wave. The first time he had felt the loop tighten, the moment the world had begun to unravel. And the secret buried deep beneath the farmhouse. He opened his eyes, determined. The journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. The chasm yawned before Courage, a tear in the earth that pulsed with an eerie, unnatural glow. It seemed alive, a wound in the fabric of reality itself. The images swirling above it rippled like broken reflections, scenes from his endless loop playing out in twisted fragments. Courage's paws pressed to the cracked soil at the chasm's edge. The earth beneath him felt thin, fragile, as if the slightest pressure might send him tumbling into the abyss below. The whisper grew louder, no longer a ghostly murmur, but a commanding voice that resonated deep within his bones. Remember, return to the beginning. His mind raced, sifting through the fragments of memory buried beneath years of fear and repetition. He saw flashes, the farmhouse, the basement, the filing cabinet filled with photographs, all clues to the curse that held him prisoner. A sudden crack echoed from the fissure below, and the images shifted violently, twisting and warping until they resolved into a single scene. A younger Muriel, laughing softly as she cradled a small, trembling Courage in her arms. But the warmth of the memory was pierced by a dark shadow creeping behind her. Courage recoiled, heart hammering. The shadow stretched its tendrils toward them, tendrils that seemed to reach not just across space, but through time. The voice whispered again, colder now, like a knife drawn slowly across raw flesh. He stepped back from the chasm, paws trembling, but the whisper was relentless. Remember. He turned and ran, breaking through the twisted cornfield, the sky above roaring as the storm finally unleashed its fury. Lightning cracked, illuminating the barren landscape in jagged flashes. The farmhouse came into view, battered and broken. Courage pushed inside, the door slamming shut behind him. The house seemed to pulse, alive with unseen energy. The walls whispered, the floorboards groaned. He raced up the stairs to the bedroom, his sanctuary and his prison. There on the bed lay a small, dust-covered box. Courage approached cautiously, nostrils flaring. The box trembled as he reached out. Inside he found a collection of objects, old keys, faded photographs, a cracked locket. Each item whispered fragments of forgotten stories. Nostrils flaring, the box trembled as he reached out. Inside, he found a collection of objects, old keys, faded photographs, a cracked locket. Each item whispered fragments of forgotten stories. He picked up the locket, opening it slowly. Inside was a tiny photograph of a young woman, her face familiar yet distant. A name whispered from the shadows. Evelyn. Courage's mind spun. The name felt like a key, unlocking a part of the past, long buried. Suddenly the house shifted. The walls stretched and twisted, rooms rearranging themselves like a maze. The floor beneath him groaned, as if warning him of the dangers ahead. From the darkness, a soft voice called, Courage. It was not Muriel or Eustace. It was something else. Something that had been waiting. The voice echoed softly through the warped halls, barely more than a breath, but it sent a chill racing down Courage's spine. It was neither comforting nor threatening. It was simply there, a presence lurking just beyond understanding. Courage gripped the locket tighter, the metal cold and heavy in his paw. The photograph of Evelyn seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive with a story waiting to be told. He took a tentative step forward, the floor creaking beneath him. The walls around the room shifted once more, and suddenly the bedroom faded into a dimly lit corridor, long and endless, lined with doors on either side. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and forgotten memories. Behind each door, faint whispers, echoes of moments Courage couldn't quite place, voices lost in time. He moved cautiously, each step echoing through the silence. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of forgotten hopes and broken promises. At the end of the corridor, a door stood ajar. Beyond it lay a room, bathed in cold blue light. Courage pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was unlike any he had seen before. The walls were lined with mirrors, dozens of them, each reflecting not just his image, but moments from his past, distorted and fragmented. One mirror showed Muriel, gentle and smiling, reaching out as if to call him home. Another captured Eustace, gruff but protective, his face etched with worry. But the mirror at the center was different. It was cracked, shards radiating outward like frozen lightning. Within it, Courage saw a version of himself, not frightened, not hesitant, but strong and determined. This other Courage stared back, eyes filled with a silent plea. Suddenly the room trembled. The mirrors flickered and fractured, shards floating into the air like shards of ice. From the cracks emerged shadows, dark tendrils that writhed and twisted, seeking, searching. The shadows lunged at Courage, tendrils wrapping around his limbs, pulling him toward the broken mirror. His heart pounded fiercely as he struggled, the shadows cold and relentless. But with a burst of will, he broke free, stumbling backward as the shards shattered and fell to the floor. The room fell silent. Courage's breath came in ragged gasps. In the shards at his feet, he saw flashes, moments of fear and courage, despair and hope. A whisper floated on the air. Remember who you are. The broken mirror's reflection shimmered once more. The strong, determined Courage stepped forward. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. A spark ignited. He was no longer just trapped in the loop. He was becoming something more. Something ready to fight. But the shadows were not gone. They lingered at the edges, waiting for the moment to strike again. The corridor stretched before him. One door remained closed. Behind it lay the heart of the mystery. When Courage steeled himself and reached for the handle. Courage's paw trembled as it closed around the cold brass handle of the last door. The air grew heavier, thick with a silence that pressed against his ears. Beyond this door lay the heart of the puzzle, the place where the loop had started and perhaps where it could end. He pulled the door open slowly. The hinges groaned like an ancient beast disturbed from slumber. Inside was a small room bathed in dim red light. The walls were lined with shelves crowded with dusty, forgotten objects, cracked clocks frozen at different times, faded letters yellowed with age, and strange trinkets whose purposes were lost to history. At the center, on a wooden pedestal, rested a small, worn book. Its leather cover was cracked and soft, the title illegible. Courage stepped closer, the shadows flickering at the edges of the room. His eyes locked on the book, sensing it held the answers, the key to breaking free. He nudged the cover open with his nose. Inside, the pages were filled with writing, loops of words written and crossed out, symbols spiraling in dizzying patterns, and sketches of the farmhouse, the cornfield, and a figure standing beneath a sky torn in two. One passage stood out, its letters darker and clearer than the rest. To escape the cycle, one must confront the source, the memory buried beneath the soil where the first crack appeared. Courage's mind raced. The basement, the filing cabinet, the first moment when time began to unravel. Suddenly, a cold gust swept through the room. The shadows closed in, whispering warnings and threats. But Courage's resolve hardened. He would face the source. He would break the loop. The room around him seemed to pulse as if alive, the red light flickering wildly. The whispers crescendoed into a roar, then dropped to silence. Courage turned away from the book, heading toward the staircase that led down. Every step took him closer to the origin of the nightmare, and perhaps to freedom. Outside, the storm had passed. The sky cracked open with stars, but the darkness still lingered, a reminder that nowhere's grip was far from broken. Courage descended into the basement once more, heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. As he reached the bottom, the familiar hum of the CRT monitor filled the air, but this time it was different. Steady, almost welcoming. The screen flickered on, showing a single image. The first photograph in the filing cabinet. A photo of Evelyn, the woman from the locket. The key to the mystery. Courage stared at the image, a silent vow forming in his mind. He would remember. He would return. He would fight. Because in nowhere the only way out was through.
Thick with dust and the weight of forgotten years. Courage's paws barely made a sound as he moved toward the glowing CRT monitor. The flickering light bathed the room in an eerie blue, casting long shadows that danced along the cracked walls. The photograph on the screen held him captive. Evelyn's face, soft and distant, framed by strands of dark hair and eyes filled with sadness. She was a piece of the puzzle he hadn't known was missing, a ghost tethered to the past that now beckoned him deeper. Behind the monitor, a faint hum began, a vibration that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. The basement walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if alive. Courage's gaze shifted to the filing cabinet. Its drawers, once empty, now rattled gently, inviting. He opened the top drawer. Inside lay a handful of old letters, yellowed and brittle. He sniffed cautiously and pawed one open. The handwriting was delicate, looping, and unfamiliar. The words whispered stories of loss and regret, promises broken and memories buried. One line stood out. The cracks beneath the soil are not just fractures in earth, but in time itself. Courage's mind raced. The soil beneath the farmhouse, beneath nowhere, was more than just dirt. It was a boundary, a threshold between what was and what should never be forgotten. A soft scratching echoed from the far corner of the basement. Courage's ears flattened, muscles tensed. From the shadows emerged a small, broken box. It was ancient, wood splintered and faded, but it pulsed with an energy that drew him in. He nudged it open. Inside, wrapped in tattered cloth, lay a small key, cold to the touch. The key seemed to hum with possibility, a promise of secrets waiting to be unlocked. But the basement shifted suddenly. The walls groaned and the floor trembled beneath him. A low rumble filled the air as the earth beneath the farmhouse cracked open once more. From the fissure,
A faint light spilled upward, illuminating a narrow tunnel descending into darkness. Courage's breath hitched. The key felt heavy in his paw, as if it knew the path it opened was one he was destined to walk. Without hesitation, Courage stepped toward the tunnel, heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. The narrow passage swallowed him whole, the walls closing in as the light dimmed. Time lost all meaning here. Sounds warped and twisted, a distant echo of laughter, the rustle of unseen footsteps, the whisper of names long forgotten. Courage pressed onward, each step a defiance against the shadows that sought to claim him. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber carved from stone and earth, ancient runes glowing faintly along the walls. At the center stood a pedestal, upon which rested an ornate box, sealed tight and humming with power. Courage approached slowly, the air thick with the scent of earth and magic. The key in his paw seemed to vibrate in response. He reached out and slid the key into the box's lock. A sudden pulse of energy surged through the chamber, and the box creaked open. Inside lay a single object, a locket identical to the one he had found before. But this one was whole, gleaming softly. Courage's eyes widened as the locket opened, revealing a small portrait, not just of Evelyn, but of a younger man beside her, eyes kind and familiar. The voice returned, soft and urgent. "Remember us?" The whispered words lingered in the heavy air, a fragile plea reaching across time. Courage's eyes fixed on the portrait inside the locket, a young woman and a man, faces blurred by years but marked by a connection deeper than memory. The same sorrow filled their eyes, a silent story trapped between moments. The chamber seemed to pulse around him, the runes on the walls glowing brighter, casting flickering shadows that danced like ghosts. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic like blood or forgotten promises. Courage's paws trembled as he traced the edges of the locket. It was more than a keepsake. It was a key, a bridge between past and present. A sudden rumble echoed through the chamber. Dust and small stones rained from the ceiling as the walls seemed to close in, tightening like a noose. Courage's heart hammered fiercely, but he stood firm. The shadows writhed at the edges of his vision, whispering doubts and fears, but he refused to look away. The voice returned, soft but insistent, threading through the chaos. "Remember who you are. Remember what was lost." Images flashed in his mind. A farmhouse bright with sunlight. Laughter ringing through the air. A promise made beneath a sky painted with stars. But then the shadows returned, twisting and turning, clawing at the edges of memory. The chamber grew colder. Frost crept along the stone, delicate and sharp. Courage's breath formed pale clouds as he moved toward the far wall, where a door, etched with symbols matching those on the box, stood slightly open. Beyond it, darkness thick and heavy beckoned. He stepped through. The world shifted. Gone were the earthen walls and ancient runes. Instead, Courage found himself in a room filled with soft light and warmth. In the center stood a woman, her hair dark and flowing, eyes filled with kindness and sorrow. She was Evelyn. She smiled gently, reaching out. "You must remember." Her voice was a whisper carried on the wind. Courage's heart ached. The years of fear and repetition fell away, replaced by a flood of understanding. "This is the beginning," she said, "the moment where everything changed." The room around them shimmered and twisted, revealing scenes of a life once lived. Laughter shared beneath the stars, a bond forged through trials, and the fracture. Evelyn's face grew grave. A choice was made, a secret buried. The loop was born from a promise broken. Courage watched, powerless, as the past unfolded like a tapestry torn at the edges. He saw himself, small and frightened, caught between worlds. And he saw the man from the photograph, the one beside Evelyn. A figure cloaked in shadow, face hidden, hands stained with regret. The voice returned once more. To break the cycle, the truth must be faced, the fear embraced, the past remembered. Courage's resolve hardened. The loop was no longer a prison. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved. But the shadows would not yield so easily. Outside the warm room, darkness gathered. The door slammed shut. And the whisper came again, a warning and a promise. Not all who return find peace. The warmth of Evelyn's presence lingered in the air, a fragile thread in the ever-thickening web of shadows. Courage's paws pressed lightly against the cold floor as the vision around him rippled and fractured, fading like mist under the morning sun. He found himself alone once again. The door shut tight behind him, sealing the soft glow and gentle voice away like a memory just out of reach. The chamber's red light flickered uncertainly, and the runes along the walls dimmed, their silent watchfulness now tinged with unease. A low rumble echoed through the cavernous space. The floor trembled beneath him, cracks spiderwebbing outward from where the ancient pedestal had stood. From one of these fissures, a new light began to pulse, this one colder, sharper, a piercing blue that cut through the crimson haze. Courage's eyes narrowed. The chill seeped into his bones, the kind of cold that spoke not of winter, but of forgotten things, buried secrets and unsaid truths. As he moved toward the source, shapes coalesced from the shadows, figures without faces, cloaked in darkness, their presence suffocating. They whispered in a language he almost recognized, their voices weaving a chant that stirred the very air. Remember, return, relinquish. The words clawed at Courage's mind, threatening to drag him under the surface of his own sanity. He blinked rapidly, shaking off the weight of their chant, and pressed on, following the pulsing light into a narrow tunnel branching from the chamber. The passage was damp, slick with moisture, and lined with roots that seemed to writhe and pulse with life. Every step echoed, each breath heavy in the confined space. The walls whispered, their voices indistinct yet haunting. Beneath the soil, beneath the time, beneath the fear. At the tunnel's end, Courage found himself standing before an ancient door, carved from a single slab of black stone, etched with symbols glowing faintly in blue. The door was cold to the touch, its surface humming with power. With the key still warm in his paw, Courage pressed it into the lock. The door groaned open, revealing a chamber unlike any before, vast, hollow, and filled with a swirling mist that obscured the floor. From within the haze emerged a figure, half-formed, shifting between light and shadow. Its eyes burned with a fierce intensity, watching Courage with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "You should not be here," it spoke, voice echoing like a distant storm. Courage's heart hammered, but he stood his ground. "Why?" The silent question filled the space between them. The figure shifted, revealing glimpses of a face twisted in pain and regret. "This place is the wound, the fracture in time and memory. To disturb it is to invite chaos." Courage's gaze hardened. He had come too far to turn back. The figure extended a hand, and the mist swirled, revealing visions, moments where the past and present collided. A child crying beneath a broken tree, a woman singing softly in the dark, a promise whispered and broken beneath a blood-red moon. The figure's voice softened. To heal, the pain must be faced, the fear embraced. Courage felt the weight of those words settle deep within him. The shadows stirred behind the figure, reaching toward him like grasping hands. But Courage did not flinch. With a breath steady and sure, he stepped forward. The mists parted, revealing a path forward, one that led deeper into the heart of Nowhere's mystery. Courage stepped into the clearing revealed by the parting mists, heart pounding but steady. The air felt charged, alive with the tension of forgotten time and buried pain. Ahead lay a weathered stone altar, cracked and covered in moss, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed faintly with an eerie light. The shadows that had pursued him lingered at the edges of the chamber, silent watchers waiting for what would come next. He approached the altar slowly, paw hovering above its surface. The cold seeped into his fur, but a warmth blossomed from within, something fierce and defiant. The voice that had guided him whispered once more, "To break the cycle, you must remember the beginning, face the fear that started it all." Images flooded Courage's mind. The day the loop began, the moment the fracture in time appeared beneath the farmhouse. A sudden scream echoed, a raw, piercing sound that reverberated through the chamber and into his very soul. The altar shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a single cracked hourglass, its sands frozen in place. Courage reached out and touched the glass. The world trembled as the sands inside began to flow backwards. Time itself seemed to unravel, folding over and over like a frayed ribbon. With the hourglass in paw, Courage felt a surge of understanding. The loop was a wound in time, a scar caused by fear and broken promises. But scars could heal. The shadows around him flickered and writhed, then slowly began to recede, dissolving into motes of light. The chamber brightened, the oppressive weight lifting. Courage took a deep breath, feeling the shift inside himself, the burden of endless repetition easing. But as the last shadow faded, a new whisper surfaced, soft, almost tender. Not all wounds heal without pain. The ground beneath the altar cracked open once more, revealing a stairway descending into darkness. Courage hesitated, paw on the first step. The journey was far from over. But for the first time he felt a spark of hope, a fragile light in the endless night. He descended into the unknown. The stairway spiraled downward into a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow all light, all sound. Each step echoed hollowly, a lonely rhythm in the deep silence. Courage's paws barely made a sound on the worn stone, but the weight in his chest was heavy, an ache born of uncertainty and fear. The air grew colder, thicker, as if the darkness itself breathed around him. Shadows clung to the walls, flickering and twisting in shapes both familiar and alien. The deeper he went, the more the boundary between memory and nightmare blurred. A faint glow appeared ahead, soft, pale blue, like the light of distant stars filtered through fog. Courage's eyes adjusted, revealing a cavernous chamber stretching beyond sight, walls carved with ancient symbols that pulsed faintly. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, worn and scarred, but holding something new, a glowing orb that hummed with a deep, resonant energy. Courage stepped forward cautiously, drawn by the orb's hypnotic light. The chamber seemed to pulse with each beat of the orb's hum, syncing with the rhythm of his own heart. The shadows around him shifted, whispering fragments of voices that seemed to echo from the past. Return. Remember. Face the truth. A sudden chill brushed past him, and the orb's glow intensified, casting long, twisting shadows that danced like specters across the wall. Courage reached out, his paw trembling, and touched the orb's surface. In an instant, the chamber dissolved, replaced by swirling visions, fractured memories and flickering moments tangled in time. He saw the farmhouse in its prime, Muriel's warm smile as she baked bread, Eustace's gruff voice complaining about chores, the peaceful stillness of the countryside. But the scenes quickly darkened. Storm clouds gathered. The wind howled, and an unseen terror crept beneath the surface. A shadowy figure moved silently among the trees, unseen but always watching. Courage's breath hitched as the vision shifted. The orb showed him a younger version of Evelyn, her face twisted in fear, running through the cornfield with desperate urgency. She stopped at a strange symbol etched into the ground, a circle broken by a jagged line. Suddenly the symbol glowed, and a rift tore open the earth beneath her feet. From the rift, a cold, dark presence emerged, a force that pulsed with ancient anger and sorrow. So Courage felt the weight of the orb's story pressing down on him, the genesis of the loop, born of a secret too terrible to speak. The visions faded, leaving him breathless in the silent chamber. The orb's hum softened, but the whispers lingered. Remember. Face the fear. Break the cycle. Courage's eyes darted around the chamber. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, illuminating a narrow passage leading deeper into the earth. His heart pounded with determination. The journey was far from over. He stepped toward the passage, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. The narrow passage stretched before Courage like a gaping maw, swallowing the faint light from the chamber behind him. Each step echoed against cold stone wall, slick with moisture and carved with strange runes that seemed to pulse with a rhythm of their own, a heartbeat ancient and relentless. The air was thick with the scent of earth and forgotten things. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, shapes that twisted and danced just beyond understanding. The whispers from the orb clung to his mind, repeating like a mantra. Remember, face the fear, break the cycle. Courage's paws pressed forward, steady to fight the knot of dread tightening in his chest. The passage bent and twisted, winding downward, deeper into the bowels of nowhere, deeper into a place where time itself felt fractured, like glass shattered and poorly mended. Suddenly, the passage opened into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in darkness. Stalactites hung like teeth, dripping cold water that echoed like distant footsteps. The walls were covered in ancient murals, faded yet vivid, depicting stories of a time long forgotten. One mural caught Courage's attention, an image of a woman standing beside a tall man cloaked in shadows. Between them was a glowing crack splitting the earth, light pouring from the fissure like a wound bleeding into the world. Above, a swirling storm roiled, lightning striking the ground with fierce energy. Courage felt the weight of the story pressing against him, a silent warning. From the darkness emerged a figure, tall and gaunt, his eyes glowing faintly with a spectral light. The shadowed man, the same one from the memories and the photographs, stepped forward, his voice low and resonant. You have come far, Courage, but this is where the truth waits, and it is not gentle. Courage's heart thundered, but he held his ground, meeting the figure's gaze. The shadowed man gestured toward the fissure in the mural, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. This fracture is the wound in time, born of fear, betrayal, and loss. It binds you here, traps you in the loop. To heal it, you must walk back through the pain, face what you hid away. Courage's mind flashed with memories, moments of fear, moments of failure, and the silent pain of endless repetition. The shadowed man continued, but beware. The past is not kind to those who seek it. The loop protects itself with shadows and whispers. It will fight. Suddenly the cavern trembled. The murals flickered and shifted, images twisting into grotesque parodies of memory. Shadows writhed at the edges, reaching for Courage with clawed hands made of smoke. He recoiled, but stood firm, determination blazing in his eyes. I will face it. The silence between them held his unspoken vow. The shadowed man nodded slowly. Then follow the path behind the fissure. It leads to the heart of the wound. As the figure faded back into darkness, the fissure in the mural glowed, a doorway opening into swirling mist. Courage stepped forward into the unknown. The air grew cold, the whispers louder. Memories and nightmares intertwined. But Courage pressed on, the fragile light of hope guiding his way. Courage stepped through the shimmering doorway, and the world shifted beneath his paws. The swirling mist embraced him, cool and thick like a living breath, muffling sound and blurring shapes. The ground felt uncertain, solid, then soft, like walking on a dream. The air was dense with whispers, voices layered atop one another, fragmented and elusive. Remember, remember, face the fear. The whispers tugged at Courage's mind, fracturing his thoughts. He pressed onward, each step heavy but resolute. Ahead, faint shapes began to materialize, a twisted landscape of memories and shadows entwined. The familiar farmhouse emerged first, warped and distorted, its walls bending as if seen through rippling water. The cornfields stretched endlessly, stalks rustling with a sinister life, bending away from an unseen force. Courage's eyes scanned the horizon, heart pounding with dread and determination. From the distance, a figure appeared, a silhouette cloaked in darkness, slow and deliberate, the tall man from his fragmented memories. The figure's presence distorted the world around him, shadows growing long and hungry. Courage took a deep breath and stepped forward. The tall man's voice echoed without sound. A presence felt more than heard. You seek to break the cycle, yet you know not what it demands. Courage's resolve did not falter. The tall man's form flickered and twisted, revealing glimpses of a face marred by sorrow and anger. You must face the source, the memory that birthed the wound. Only then can you hope to heal. The world around them began to fracture further. The ground cracked, and from the fissures emerged echoes, visions of past fears and regrets. Courage saw himself as a small pup, trembling in the dark, chased by shadows that whispered doubt and despair. He saw Muriel and Eustace, caught in a loop of fear and frustration, repeating the same day over and over. The tall man extended a hand toward Courage. Step forward and confront the memory, embrace the pain. A sudden gust of wind swept through the landscape, tearing at the cornfields and scattering the whispers. Courage's heart raced, but he stepped forward. The ground beneath him fractured, opening into a pit of swirling shadows. Inside, a vision unfolded, a young Evelyn standing beside the tall man, her face radiant but tinged with fear. A secret was shared, a promise made beneath a blood-red moon. The moment fractured time, splintering reality into the endless loop. Courage's eyes filled with understanding and sorrow. He reached into the swirling shadows and touched the heart of the memory. Pain exploded through him, raw and searing, a flood of emotions long buried. But beneath the agony, a light flickered, fragile and bright. He clung to it. The tall man's voice softened. Remember, Courage. Only through memory and courage can the cycle be broken. The shadows recoiled, the swirling landscape beginning to calm. The farmhouse regained form. The sky cleared, and the cornfield stood still, peaceful. Courage's breath steadied. The loop was unraveling. But the journey was not over. A new path opened, one leading beyond memory, into the unknown. The vision faded, and Courage stood alone in the stillness. The mist had thinned. The whispers fell silent. The air now felt like the breath before a storm, hushed, heavy with meaning. Beneath his paws, the earth had changed. The cracked soil of the dreamscape had healed and now lined with faint glowing patterns, symbols that pulsed with a quiet rhythm like a heartbeat returning to a long-dead body. He had touched the memory, faced it, and something in the loop had changed. The sky above, once a churning void, began to clear. Stars blinked into existence one by one, familiar but not quite right, as if the cosmos had been shattered and hastily stitched back together. Courage looked around. He was no longer in the mist, nor the vision of nowhere. He stood in the place outside time, where the fabric of reality wore thin. Beneath him stretched a floating bridge of stone, suspended over a swirling abyss that glimmered with fragments of past and future. Ahead, the bridge led to a single door. Ancient, towering, breathing. The final door. Courage took a slow breath, then began walking. With each step, the air thickened, memories brushing past him like wind. Muriel humming in the kitchen, the flicker of an old television screen, the thunderstorm that never ended, the endless, endless morning. The door loomed larger. Its surface was marked by the same runes he'd seen before, but now they no longer glowed. They waited. Courage reached out. The door creaked open without resistance, revealing a darkness deeper than any before. But this time, he didn't hesitate. He stepped through. The door shut silently behind him. He was ready. Darkness, not the kind that comes with the absence of light, but a deeper one, thick, ancient, sentient, the kind that waits. Courage stood still, his paws planted on stone that felt impossibly cold. The door had vanished behind him. There was no turning back now. The silence here was absolute. Not even the beat of his own heart reached his ears. Then, movement. Faint. Far. A low groan rose from the depths, like a breath held too long. The chamber lit slowly, not with light, but memory. The walls around him bloomed with shifting images, familiar scenes, familiar faces, but distorted, wrong. Muriel, motionless at the table, her smile frozen. Eustace standing before a static-filled TV, his eyes vacant. Courage moved closer to the walls, and the images changed. Faster now, more chaotic. The cornfield swallowed by black rot. The farmhouse sinking into the soil. The sky bleeding red, and always, always the shadow. That tall, faceless presence, watching, waiting. A voice, low and hollow, echoed through the void. Do you understand now? Courage didn't answer. He couldn't. The voice wasn't asking a question. It was drawing something out of. The room shifted. The ground beneath him dissolved, and he was falling not down but inward, into himself, spiraling through his own memories, his own fears. The first storm, the first scream, the night he failed to save them. He landed hard. The world returned, but not as it was. He stood in the farmhouse kitchen, but it was wrong. The colors were drained, everything slow, like a film decaying in reverse. Muriel sat at the table, humming. But her face... No eyes, just smooth, pale skin. She turned toward him anyway, as if she could see. Courage, she said without moving her mouth. You kept us safe, even when the world forgot. A tear welled in his eye, but it didn't fall. The image cracked, like glass under strain. And through the cracks, the voice returned, clearer now, closer. You were not supposed to see. Courage's paws dug into the floor. This wasn't memory. It was a prison. Each room he entered now was a trap dressed in nostalgia, rooms twisted by time and shame. His old bed now too large and too empty, the attic lined with boxes that whispered his name when he passed. The voice followed him from wall to wall. They built the loop to protect themselves, to keep the truth from surfacing. Courage stopped. He turned. And there, at the center of this dreamlike ruin, stood the tall man. For the first time, his face was visible. And it was Courage's. Not the timid dog he knew, but something older, hardened, eyes filled with burden and wisdom and guilt. The figure stood motionless, and yet it radiated weight. Not physical, emotional, existential. It was courage, yet it wasn't. A version of him sculpted by years the real courage hadn't lived, by loops that had consumed lifetimes. His double stepped forward, paused silent on the warped wooden floor. The farmhouse walls pulsed slowly around them, like lungs breathing in a dream. Courage stared. Ernst. The double's mouth did not move, but the voice returned. Clearer now. Less disembodied. More real. I broke the world to save them. Courage didn't move. The double turned, gazing at a flickering vision hovering in the air between them. It was a frozen moment, a snapshot of Muriel, terrified, screaming in the cornfield, a jagged rift behind her, spilling light and shadow. I saw what was coming, the double continued, his voice low, tired. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a ghost. It was time, and time takes everything. The vision shifted. Muriel falling. Courage rushing forward. Too late. I begged the world to give me one more chance. The double's voice cracked. So it gave me this. He waved his paw slowly, and the farmhouse melted away like wax. In its place stood an abstract plane, countless looping moments spiraling above and below them, each one a bubble of time. Muriel smiling, Muriel afraid, Eustace laughing. Eustace vanished, Courage screaming into silence. Endless variations of the same sequence. The double pointed to the loops. These are the echoes. Every time I tried to fix it, something was lost. A piece of her, a piece of me. I kept chasing the perfect outcome. Courage looked up at the infinite spirals. They turned slowly, like dying planets caught in gravity's cruel orbit. The double's voice lowered. But the loop doesn't fix things. It hollows you out, memory by memory, until you're nothing but Judy. He turned back to Courage. But then you came. The version of me that remembered pain, that kept feeling even when the world tried to grind it out. Courage blinked. He didn't know what this place was anymore. Purgatory, dream, dying neuron in a looping brain, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that he felt terror, sorrow, and now something else. Rage. Not loud or fiery, but cold and deep. The rage of being robbed of goodbye, the rage of memory being erased in the name of safety. He stepped toward his double. The room trembled. I don't want another chance, Courage thought. I want the truth. The double nodded solemnly, as if hearing his mind. Then take it. The swirling loops above them collapsed inward, spiraling into the floor. From the center of the implosion rose a figure. Not a shadow, not a memory. Muriel, still, silent, her eyes closed, her form hazy. A final memory sealed away at the center of the cycle. The double whispered, "This is where it ends." She hovered in the stillness. Muriel, suspended in the soft, dreamlike light that pulsed faintly from within her, her form flickered at the edges like an image unable to fully stabilize. Her eyes remained closed, her breath shallow and silent, as though caught in a sleep that memory itself dared not disturb. Courage approached slowly. The air around her was heavy, not with darkness, but with history. The gravity of forgotten truths pressed against his chest. Every step toward her felt like wading through time itself. Behind him, the fractured version of himself, the older Courage, the loop keeper, stood still, as though fading into transparency with each passing second. "She's not dead," the double said softly. "But she's not alive either. She's memory, frozen. This moment, this version of her, is what I tried to preserve." Courage looked up at Muriel, her hands folded gently, a faint smile playing across her lips. "It was the night she disappeared," the double continued. "The original loop, the start. The fracture opened beneath the house. Something came through, or maybe something went out." The air vibrated subtly, and around the suspended figure of Muriel, images shimmered in the dimness. They told a fragmented story. The storm rolling in, the television screen glowing too brightly, the radio emitting static in languages not meant for ears. Muriel stepping out into the cornfield, never coming back. Courage watched it all, silent. "I couldn't accept it," said the double. "I cried out, not to a god, not to anything holy. I screamed into the void, and the void answered." The light around Muriel suddenly pulsed. Once, twice, her image shimmered, and for a brief moment, her eyes opened. Not wide, not fully, but just enough for Courage to see that she saw him. A tear welled in his eye instantly. Muriel smiled faintly, and a voice, so soft it almost didn't exist, echoed through the space between them. "You always kept us safe." The words broke something open. Courage stepped forward and pressed his paw against the memory of her hand. It passed through at first, like fog, but then contact. The moment solidified. Light surged outward, flooding the dreamscape. The floating fragments of looping time began to collapse inward, merging into a singularity of memory and meaning. The fractured Courage behind him fell to his knees, eyes wide as light poured through the cracks in his being. "This is it," he whispered. "This is what it was all for." But even as the world began to stabilize, a sound returned. A pulse. Low. Wrong. The cycle was not letting go. The air trembled, and from the abyss surrounding them rose a new form, tall, stretched, faceless, and featureless, a shadow that towered over all. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't a ghost. It was the loop itself, raw, hungry, afraid. It moved slowly, methodically, as if bound by its own ancient rhythm. Its arms, long tendrils of smoke and time, reached for Muriel, for Courage, for the light that now dared to undo it. Courage turned, eyes burning. This time, he didn't retreat. He stepped in front of Muriel's suspended form, planting his paws into the ground. The loop hissed, not with sound, but with sensation, like the pressure drop before a coming storm. Then it lunged. Courage braced for impact, but the fractured Courage stepped forward first. He placed himself between Courage and the oncoming storm, raising a paw not in defense, but in surrender. "She's free now," he said. "I held it too long." The loop halted for a split second, then surged and swallowed him whole. The light consumed the fractured Courage, swallowed by the storm he'd built to protect what he could never save. There was no scream, no cry, just silence, deep and vast, as if the loop itself had inhaled for the first time in eons. And then, cracks. Thin white fractures sliced through the air, spiderwebbing across the world around them. Time groaned like an old structure buckling under its own impossible design. The loop was unraveling. The shadow twisted violently, tendrils snapping in every direction, grasping for shape, for anchor, for control. But it was losing form. Its edges broke apart like ash in the wind. Courage stood motionless, staring into the storm. He didn't move. He didn't run.
Instead, he reached back and touched Muriel's hand again. Warm now, soft, real. She opened her eyes fully this time. The world around them shook, but her voice cut through the chaos like a lullaby in a storm. "You were never meant to carry this alone." Her hand tightened around his. Behind them, the void screamed. Then, silence. The darkness collapsed inward, folding in on itself until it became nothing at all. And then, for the first time in what felt like forever, there was light. The morning sun rose slowly over the fields of nowhere. The corn swayed gently in the breeze. Birds chirped lazily in the distance. The air smelled like rain had come and gone, washing the world clean. Inside the farmhouse, Muriel hummed as she prepared breakfast. The old kettle whistled softly. Eustace sat in his chair, grumbling at the newspaper, muttering about taxes or squirrels. It didn't matter. And Courage? He lay on the floor near the door, resting his head on his paws, eyes half closed in the warm sunlight. But something in him had changed. He remembered. Not everything. Some things were too deep, too strange. But the loop was broken. He could feel it in the stillness, in the peace.
A faint breeze rustled the curtains. For just a second, he glanced at the wall clock. It ticked forward, not back. Forward. And with that small sound, courage smiled. Not because the fear was gone, but because it no longer ruled him. He had faced the hollow and found his heart still beating